Okay, abuse and church discipline. This is Church Discipline and Love number 10 of 12. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. In 3 John chapter 1 verse 9 through 11, the Apostle John wrote this. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious slander about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. End quote. Here is an example of church discipline abuse. Satan wants us to go from one extreme to the other. Never exercise biblical church discipline or exercise abusive church discipline. One is just as evil as the other. Church discipline abuse is always a result of a wrong heart of some kind. Here in 3 John, it's obvious. Diotrephes loves to be first. Church discipline for one's own hidden agenda is always evil, and it will always be accompanied by malicious slander, as we see here. In such situations, to not have someone who is unfearful and with the authority and wisdom of an apostle who can and should intervene will inevitably leave such a church indefinitely unholy. A true apostle would do as the Apostle John said he would do, and also confirmed by the Apostle Paul in writing to his young apostle Timothy. In 1 Timothy 5:19 through 20, Paul wrote, Do not listen to an accusation against an elder unless it is confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. But those who sin should be reprimanded in front of the whole church. This will serve as a strong warning to others. End quote. This sort of thing is never an enjoyable situation, but a true apostle would deal with it according to God's word. If God ever has you in such a situation, you should not run from it, but support that one who has a heart like the apostles John, Paul, and Timothy. And if you remain strong, God will use it to make you a much greater Christian for his glory. There are 2 things in most of today's churches that no longer honor or follow God's word, but actually, 1, promote the Diotrephes example, and 2, deny God's greatest gift to the church to remove problematic Diotrephes. New Testament solution number 1, plurality of teachers. In all New Testament churches, they were set up to always have a plurality of teachers. Acts 2:42 says, quote, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, plural, apostles. Here we see all 12 of the apostles were the teachers of the church in Jerusalem. The New Testament makes it clear that all elders in a church were teaching in the church, and all elders were exhorted to, as 1 Timothy 5:17 says, elders work hard at both preaching and teaching. End quote. All elders taught, and even all apostles were, quote, fellow elders, end quote, 1 Peter 5:1. In the New Testament, the believers had their gatherings only in homes throughout the town, but the apostles established only one plurality group of teachers per town, as each town or city was always referred to as one single church. Paul said, I'm writing to God's church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians 1:2. The single church in the city of Corinth started to divide up under different individual teachers, like churches have done today. When the Apostle Paul heard this, he powerfully condemned it and concluded saying, quote, has Christ been divided? 1 Corinthians 1:10 through 13. There is no way the Apostle Paul could have condemned any stronger than this one-man teaching model that we see in churches today. In all the New Testament, it was to be one group of teachers per only one church per town. Paul wrote to Titus in chapter 1, 5 through 9, quote, I left you on the island of Crete so you could complete our work and there appoint elders in each town. Then they will be able to encourage others with wholesome teaching." End quote. Contrary to the New Testament, today's churches are actually set up to be organized around one man, the one-man teacher. So today they unwittingly establish one-man Diotrephes as church. It's not even assumed as evil, contrary to what the apostles John and Paul condemned. However, a one-man pastor today might not be guilty of slander, but if they were ever challenged to not remain in first teaching position, it might be interesting what some might retort, or maybe just leave to go find some unbiblical one-man Diotrephes church. God designed a family to have two parents, a plurality, even as he ordained the church family to have a plurality of spiritual parent teachers. Though some children grow up wonderfully with only one beautiful parent teaching them, like some churches with only one teacher. But how sad if Christians promoted that families should have only one parent. That is not biblical. Even so, how sad for Christians to promote that any church family should have only one parent teacher. That too is not biblical. No matter how good one parent is, two good parents will always be better for a family. Even so, no matter how good one Bible teacher is, a plurality of good Bible teachers will always be better for a church family. When there is a plurality of teachers, they can show being subject to one another, Ephesians 5:21, and show humility in valuing others above themselves, their fellow leaders, Philippians 2:3. As said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Jesus said the same in Luke 6:40, quote, "When everyone is fully trained, they will be like their teacher," end quote. Jesus did not say like their teaching, but rather like their teacher. Jesus also said in Luke 22:26, "Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant." New Testament solution 2, God's greatest gift to the church. Few Christian groups follow the New Testament example of apostles for today, and some groups that use that name are in authoritarian power trips themselves and should be avoided. But in the New Testament, the most humble, most mature, and most influential spiritual leaders were all apostles. The Latin word for apostle is missionary. Satan has done a great word game switch on Christians today. If Christians would replace the word apostle with missionary in their Bibles, they would be shocked how most of their missionaries today are not biblical missionaries at all. In the first century, there are over a half dozen verses in the New Testament that said the apostles, those missionaries, being apostles, were literally reaching all the world, even as the heathen declaring that they were turning the world upside down. Why were they doing so much more than we are today? The New Testament apostolic model is God's missionary model and dramatically different than today's so-called missionary model. I don't have time here to biblically answer the fallacious reasons some assume God's apostolic model is not for today. I have already written whole articles on this subject in other of my Substack you can read if you're not sure about it. Suffice it to say here, God said it was his greatest gift to the church, as he always put it first on his list of gifts for church leaders. What biblical ignorance to think God is less concerned about his church today to eliminate his greatest gift for the church, especially when he never said it ceased, but rather just the opposite. 1 Corinthians chapter 12:28 and Ephesians 4:11 through 13. First in Corinthians says, "And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers." And then it goes on to say, "And earnestly desire these greater gifts," that is, first apostles. Then in Ephesians it says, "Now these are the gifts of Christ that he gave to the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people, and this will continue." End quote. After the 12 apostles and Paul, There were many more apostles recorded in the New Testament. They were turning the world upside down for Christ. We must embrace the New Testament in having genuine apostles today if we are ever going to be turning our world upside down for Christ like they did in the New Testament.